When you hear the phrase vulnerable leader, what does that make you think of?
Willingness to recognize that you don't know. And a lot
Yeah.
of times, actually, it's not easy to say, look, I don't know. Everybody screws up, but sometimes it's hard to say, look, I screwed up and I made a mistake. And then it gets to a little bit more personal. So in my case, it is sometimes the willingness to recognize your character weaknesses.
When you hear the phrase vulnerable leader, what does that make you think of?
I guess it's about I think being authentic and being able to being confident to show your weaknesses. I guess it's not even weaknesses. I think of vulnerability. I thought about it in the car on the way in, and I thought of vulnerability at different levels. So one is just the willingness to recognize that you don't know, and a lot
Yeah.
of times actually, it's not easy to say, look, I don't know, and I
Yeah.
have, right? And then it goes on from there. I think the second level is too willingness to acknowledge you made a mistake. And everybody screws up, but sometimes it's hard to say, look, I screwed up and I made a mistake. Um, and then it gets to a little bit more personal. So in my case, it is sometimes the willingness to recognize your character weaknesses. So I've got a short temper, and to be able to share that with the team, frankly, with the larger population, is not easy, but it's actually very helpful as well. Eventually,
Yeah.
and then
Well, it's interesting you mentioned. Oh, sorry. Was there going to be another
there's a
level?
fourth level, right? Because and that's the most difficult because there's always a stigma attached to mental wellness. And
Yeah.
so I had a couple of bouts of severe anxiety and insomnia and so on, and those are not things typically people want to talk about because that's really the ultimate lodestone for weakness. So there's a big stigma attached to it. So my
Yeah.
point is, each of these finally, when you drill down to that, is about having the confidence to be yourself and to
Yeah.
be able to share, your situation. And I think some of it comes from the recognition you're all human beings. There is
Yeah.
no one person who is not flawed in some way. And if you're willing to sort of share those, it not only engenders trust, but it probably helps create a environment where people can help you. So,
I like that you mentioned levels. One of the things that I'm trying to explore in the book are to come up with like different levels of vulnerability, but it's hard because it can be very subjective. In other words, those could be your four levels, but for other people, maybe sharing an anxiety would be level number one. That's easy for them. And number three would be asking for help because they're not comfortable with that. So I like that you mentioned that, but speaking of that anxiety, maybe we could jump right into a story. So what was the anxiety, the stress, the lack of sleeping? Was it something related to leadership, something that was going on at work?
actually, no clue. Well, I have a clue. I had two instances. One was related to work. So this was many years ago, like 20 years ago. It wasn't to do with DBS. I turned 40. I quit my job as a high flying executive at Citi and went off to set up a .com in the first internet days. And so I relocated. Wife, two young kids, and 4 months later, the whole internet bubble collapsed, and 6 8 months later I was basically caught between what I'd left or what I really wanted to do with my life. And so those next 2 3 months were really tough. I had to place back the people I'd hired, but more importantly, there's a lot of self-doubt, questions about failure, questions about uncertainty about the future, what do I want to do with myself. And so that's the first time I went into, I thought of depression. The doctors told me it was just severe anxiety, but
Hmm.
I had to take medication. And it took me several months, almost a year, to break out of that and get
Wow.
back into a normal rhythm. The
So what
second
was the
time
anxiety
was
like?
more recent.
Oh yeah. So before you get to the second one, so with the anxiety, like how was it feeling? Like what impact did it have on your
Panic.
body when you
Oh,
say
panic.
anxiety?
Massive panic. So I'd have panic attacks. I could sleep for large this thing, but most importantly, I had panic attacks which would come either at night, daytime, it's all the usual, sweating, but most importantly, your mind starts playing tricks. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just need to jump out and, go for a walk or do something. I learned meditation at that time. And that's actually been a huge help to me ever since because meditation lets you sort of quieten the mind.
Yeah.
Um, but
It's funny.
yeah, it was very stressful.
I had a panic attack last year, so I know exactly how you feel. I thought I was having a heart attack. I like Made my wife take me to the emergency room. I thought, oh my God, I'm dying. Like there's something wrong with me. And then the doctors were like, no, you're in perfect health. You're probably just having a panic attack. And I realized that the panic attack was coming because I was writing a book about vulnerability and I'm not a vulnerable person. So I talked to a therapist and they're like, yeah, you're probably having panic because you're being forced to confront something that you're not. You're forced because I come from a family of Russian immigrants. My dad is not the most vulnerable person in the world, so I know exactly what that feeling is like.
But I know in that case it was just triggered by uncertainty about the future and
Yeah,
the recrimination of having made a wrong career choice. Right.
yeah,
So you put those two things together, it created a lot of stress. But I was going to carry on saying I had another episode about 5 years ago, and that I still haven't nailed down the cause of it because life was good, business was good, I was doing well in the job, and suddenly I went through a 3 day stretch where I couldn't sleep a wink. And if you don't sleep, you can't function after
wow,
day one or day two. And in all likelihood, what the doctor who I consulted said to me, he said, "You're not overworked. You just um, got too many things going on, and
yeah,
therefore your head is flitting from stuff to stuff all the time, and you're not giving your brain a chance to turn off at all." And
yeah,
that included non-work related. So he pointed out when I was sitting with him in my first meeting, he said, "You realize you reach into your jacket to pull out your phone every 30 seconds. So you've got into the
mm,
habit of actually looking at something, whether it's your mail or whether it's just Google or whether it's Bloomberg, and you're constantly looking at this. And every time you look at it, it's firing some impulse, neurons in your brain. And you might think it's just a picture on Insta, but each one of those activities causes the brain to respond. And because
mm,
it does that, your brain doesn't get the opportunity to get what it is used to, which is moments of quiet. And so
interesting.
the solution he gave me, which sort of worked, of course, apart from some medication again, but he basically said, you take a week off and don't touch the phone. And so we did that. I took a week off, and my wife confiscated my phone, and she let me look at it like 3 minutes in the morning and 3 minutes in the evening for a week straight. And I think that that
Wow.
helped.
Yeah. Oh man, those are good stories.